everybody. My name is Storie. I am a school psychologist. I'm actually doing this presentation tonight, though, wearing 3 different hats. I work full-time as a school psychologist and have worked as one for the past 16 years in 4 different school districts in central New York. But I also work as the director of the Syracuse University Psychoeducational Teaching Lab, and I've been doing that for the past 17 years as well. That is a university clinic where we do evaluations, typically not initial evaluations, but we do second opinion evaluations, or IEEs, and we use the information to present to school districts. I then, about 3 years ago, went into private practice, and that's why you also see me listed under Educational Solutions, because I was getting referrals for my clinic at SU from California, Massachusetts, and our waiting list was typically a year long. So I felt that there was a need to provide more private psychological services in the area. So I'm going to be presenting the school perspective tonight, and Dr. Clonan will be speaking more from the private practitioner, but please know that I kind of wear a few different hats in this process.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Sheila Clonan. I, together with Michelle, founded Educational Solutions, CNY. I am currently in full-time private practice, but I started my career as a school psychologist in the Syracuse City Schools, actually. And I want to tell a little story, because it kind of gives a context for how I came to do what I do now, and why I feel so very strongly about that. And so, you know, as a newly minted school psychologist, I can remember some of my first couple of cases. You know, the parent or the teacher referred the student, and I did all my magical school psychology tests, and I wrote this beautiful report, and then we had this kind of pre-CSE meeting where I just enlightened the teacher with all of my wonderful results. Are you groaning inside of your teacher right now, right? Right? So I told them all the wonderful things that I found in my assessment, and I waved my little school psychologist wand, and I said, this child has a learning disability in reading. And the teacher just looked at me kind of slack jaw. And she kind of looked me up and down, and she went, yeah, that's why I referred him to you. And it took me a minute to recover from that. And I said, okay, and she said, so what do we do about it? I didn't learn that in my school psychology master's program. And I went running back. First I went running to my, this happened a few more times, and then not ever quite as intense as that, though I would never forget. And I talked to that teacher later, and she said, I was just disappointed because I thought you were going to be one of the good ones. And she said, but don't worry, you turned into one. So I went to, my supervising school psychologist, and I said, hey, I'm doing all my magic tricks here, and I'm waving my wand, and I'm declaring these disabilities, and nobody cares. Like, they want to know what to do with it, and I don't know what to do with it. What do I do with it? And he said, you just diagnose it. So I went back, and I still disgruntled, still not happy with the work I was doing, and so eventually I landed back on the doorstep of one of my former professors, and I said, hey, I get a lot of referrals for, first I go to my behaviorally oriented professor, and I say, I'm getting a lot of referrals for kids that, the teachers are like, really concerned about the behaviors. And I do my testing, and it turns out they actually have a reading disability. So we're figuring out, that the behavior is presenting itself, but really there's an underlying reading problem, but I still don't know what to do with that. And he said, but you did the right thing. You identified that the underlying problem was a reading problem. And I said, okay, but now what? And he didn't know. So then I show up at the doorstep of one of my other former professors, who was more of a neuropsych focus, and I said, hey, I'm having this problem here. I'm diagnosing all these kids with learning disabilities in reading, and I don't know what to do with them. And the teachers want me to tell them what to do, and I thought they knew what to do, and they think I know what to do, and nobody knows what to do. What do we do? And I'm kind of all spinning around in circles, and he stands up and he says, I have someone I want you to meet. And he walks me downstairs, through a hallway, into an office in the corner, a dark office in the corner, knocks on the door, and he says, this is Benita Blackman, have a seat. And I talked to her for about an hour, one of those first meetings, and eventually I did go back and get my doctorate. I did stick with school psychology, though I thought long and hard about, should I do something, do something different, get a second master's in literacy, what do I do? But I did end up sticking with school psychology. I got my doctorate. And then I did a postdoc fellowship with Benita and the Yale Child Study Center for Dyslexia, and that was life-changing. And so I got to work with kids and families who were struggling, and I got to see what a difference it made when they learned how to read. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what helps kids learn to read. So that was a really important changing point for me. From there, I stayed at Syracuse University for a number of years and taught there, and then I taught for a little over a decade at Colgate University. Always on the side doing this private practice and a lot of advocacy. Which brings me to the second thing that you should know about me. I'm also a wife and a mother. My husband is one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's also dyslexic. We have 4 children. Guess what? We got some dyslexics, right? So I have, between the 4 of them, some dyslexia, some auditory processing disorders, some attention deficit disorder, and the littlest one hit the jackpot because he has an extra chromosome. So I know what it's like to try to get your child the services they need. I know what it's like when your child is struggling and nobody knows how to help them. And I know what it's like to want to help kids and not know what to do, right? That's why I told you my incompetency story, right? Because all we can do is the best with what we know, and then when we know better, we do better, right? And so that's my goal for all of you, for parents, teachers, psychologists, whatever your role is, that together we learn, and we learn how to do the best job that we can, and we learn how to work together to help all kids be successful. So that's why I'm here. Okay, so today, all right, so just a really quick overview. We're going to talk about we're going to focus on reading disability or assessments for reading, just kind of to make that easier, and also because, no surprise, 80% of kids with learning disabilities have a reading disability. So when we talk about why, what, when, who, and how of reading assessment, we need to think about the whys. Why are we testing kids? And I have another slide on this later, so I won't even go into that. What are we doing? What does testing mean? And that means a number of different things, probably even more than what we have on the slide and what we're going to cover, but we'll talk about a couple of those. And when do we do this? Whenever there's a concern, right? Today, tomorrow, next year, over and over and over until we solve the problem, right? That's when we do assessment. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about who refers, what the teachers, educators' roles are, what the parents' roles are, and then we're going to talk about who evaluates. And as Michelle said, we've both kind of been on all sides of this issue, but for today, she'll mostly represent the school side, and I will mostly represent the private side. And then we'll talk about, Michelle will cover with you some of the most commonly used tests and how to interpret them. All right, I hear voices. That must mean we're ready, right? Ready to go? All right, so I told you earlier on the agenda slide that we'd come back to this, right? So why do we engage in reading assessment? Well, we do that to make sure kids are progressing. We do it to figure out what their skill level is in various areas. We do it to find out what their strengths and needs are. But the parts that we're going to focus on tonight is we often engage in individual reading assessments to determine whether a child has a disability, and to determine whether they're eligible for special education services. And obviously, always, those data should be used for designing interventions. Okay, so I'm going to just introduce the law, and I think Michelle also wants to pick up on this piece. But what I want to point out, I know this has a lot of text, you have it on your knowledge sheet. I'm not going to read it to you, but this is the language under the Special Education Law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And what I want to point out about it is it's categorical, which means a child has to fit one of the 13 categories under the law, and those are listed there, in order to be considered a child with a disability. And it's also eligibility focused, and what that means is that just having a disability doesn't necessarily mean the child is eligible for special education services, okay? So there's an eligibility focus that has to be determined.
I'll let you go. And we're going to be talking more about the eligibility piece as the night progresses. But one of the pieces I did want to point out, and it is one of the questions on your quiz, pertains to dyslexia being listed. It's not one of the 13 categories of a disability according to IDEA, but a specific learning disability is one of the categories, and it does specifically state that dyslexia can be one of those conditions subsumed under an SLD category, so I did want to point that out. The other piece related to a specific learning disability is that it must be a disorder in basic psychological processes, one or more, that affects the understanding and using of language. And again, the definition is in your knowledge sheet. But the other important component is that the disability must affect the student's ability to learn. So sometimes we're faced with students who, and now I'll put on my school psychologist hat, where a student does receive a diagnosis of dyslexia from a private evaluator, and they come back to us, but they're demonstrating, according to the classroom teacher, age-appropriate and average range reading performance in the school. So they're not demonstrating a difficulty learning in the classroom setting. So in order for it to qualify as a disability, it must be affecting the student's ability to learn. That's not to say the student might not be eligible for a 504 plan if they need accommodations, but I do want to point out that piece that it must affect the student's ability to learn to be eligible as a disability under IDEA. Okay, I'm only going to briefly cover RTI because I know Heidi did a great job of covering that in depth at the last Reading League assessment. But I think it's important to know that we now are able to use an RTI approach to look at information and make decisions. But as with any approach, RTI cannot be the sole determining factor. It's important that you're using many different components in making a decision about eligibility for a student. And a big portion of that pertains to the individual educational evaluation. So it's important that there are a variety of processes that are investigated, that many different test measures are used. It's supposed to be a multidisciplinary process, so it is not supposed to be completed by one individual. I know in some school districts, the school psychologists do the achievement testing. In other school districts, special educators do the achievement testing. But even if the school psychologist is the primary one doing the achievement testing and the cognitive and the behavior rating scales, it still is supposed to be a multidisciplinary approach. There should be information from the general education teacher, from the special education teacher, from any other service providers who may work with the student. And I think that's an important piece to effective decision making. The other, and the parent, of course. There has to be input from the parent. And when we talk about a specific evaluation, we have several slides because we are going to be going into what a reading assessment would look like at the school level and also at the private evaluation level. And parent input is key for both of those types of evaluations. The other piece is the evaluation needs to be comprehensive. So it really needs to be covering all of the areas of difficulty that a student may be experiencing. The final piece that I want to point out is that it is important that data demonstrates the student was provided appropriate instruction delivered by qualified personnel. So it's not enough to say that the student was receiving a certain intervention by a teacher. The teacher needs to be qualified to deliver the research-based intervention. They need to have training and know how to deliver the intervention. So I know, again, Heidi delivered an excellent talk about RTI and about the basic reasons for the RTI language, but a lot of the information in the whole process of RTI is vague, and there isn't specific guidelines on determinations for responding and lack of response to intervention, and the specific interventions haven't been delineated. It's important that information about effective instruction is provided as part of the intervention, and the person who is delivering the intervention is qualified to do so. Okay, I think I already covered some of this, but again, getting back to some of the concerns with RTI, a lot of the information with determining whether or not a student is responding can be vague. How many of you know your specific criteria for determining if a student is or is not responding to an intervention? For those of you who work in a school. Show of hands? And that's concerning, because we're saying that this can be used as a method to determine whether or not students are eligible for special ed, but yet we don't know the criteria for how we're making those decisions. I want to point out one piece, and I'm going to click on this slide. This is the National Center on Intensive Intervention website, and I'm pretty sure this is listed as a resource on your knowledge sheet. So this lists effective academic progress monitoring tools. If you scroll down, were you to click on this link, you will find that it lists this was based on a study that was done. The federal government had funding to determine what are effective progress monitoring tools. And so if you scroll down, you'll see AIMSweb's on here, Dibbles is on here, CBM is on here, iReady's on here.
Educators use so many acronyms. Can you, for the none?
Yes. So, as part of the RTI process, how many of you are not familiar with RTI? Response to intervention?
Just a couple.
Okay, we'll see some more. Okay. So RTI stands for Response to Intervention. And what happened is, for many years, specific learning disabilities were identified according to the discrepancy model. So you would gather information about a student's IQ or cognitive potential, and you would gather information about a student's academic achievement, and you would plug this information into a computerized formula. And it was actually pretty easy and simple. The problem is there were some pretty significant flaws with that process, because it wasn't adequately discriminating between kids who truly had a learning disability and didn't have a learning disability. It was based on an arbitrary number that determined that, okay, you qualify for services and you are not eligible to receive services. So legislation changed several years ago that said that in July of 2012, school districts had to change their policies for looking at eligibility for students with specific learning disabilities in reading for kids in grades K through 4, and they have to consider the use of a response to intervention model. Or they can also use a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in determining specific learning disability eligibility. Promise John Grudo I'd throw that in there too. Also part of the regs. Okay, so when you're looking at whether or not a student is responding to intervention, so again, getting back to RTI, so tier 1 is intervention that's provided to the entire class. It's just effective, scientific-based instruction. And for those students who don't respond to the instruction in the classroom, according to screening measures, they qualify for tier 2 interventions, which are typically delivered in small groups it's supplemental instruction, and progress monitoring should occur to ensure that the interventions the child is receiving are working for the students. If they're not effective, then they move to Tier 3 instruction. What is Tier 3? More intensive intervention. And again, progress monitoring occurs. And then according to the RTI model, should a student not respond to the interventions at the Tier 3 level, the student is then evaluated to determine whether or not they meet eligibility for a specific learning disability. So that's RTI in a nutshell. Yes?
Do they have to spend a certain amount of time in each tier?
That's an excellent question, and it's one that is not stipulated by the states. Typically, there's general agreement that students should spend about, you hear anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks or 8 to 10 weeks at a specific intervention, but many school districts will have you do more than one round of Tier 2 or Tier 3, typically, before looking at evaluating. Any other questions?
Folks, if you have questions, by all means, I don't know, what do you guys want to save a special time or just any time?
We're gonna have a time, but anytime.
Anytime. I'd rather you shout them out.
Yes, and we
That's
have
the way it works.
2 microphones here to step up to because we want to be able to capture so that everyone can hear your questions. So that's like, oh, and each mic just has a button. We'll figure it out. So.
But if you're curious if the progress monitoring tools that are being used at your school are effective tools and recognized as being strong measures for progress monitoring, go to this website. That's why I included the link. And you can scroll down and see some of the different measures there. You'll notice that F&P levels are not on that list. Fountas and Pinnell levels are not progress monitoring tools. It's a reading series that tells where a student may be reading in this graded reading series. A reading teacher would probably give a far better explanation. We're going to move into the New York State criteria for determining a learning disability. And again, this is the legalese of the definition. So it does specifically state that underachievement of a student cannot be due to a lack of appropriate instruction. Now I want to point that out because there are a couple of cases where you might find a lack of appropriate instruction. One of those would be if a student is showing excessive absenteeism. There's going to be underachievement, but you can't state that that is due to a specific learning disability. It is one of the exclusions, a lack of appropriate instruction. The other piece would be a student who might be homeschooled, and the parents are kind of homeschooling, but doing it in more of a leisurely pace than a typical classroom setting. In those situations, again, you cannot state that unless the parent can show you the specifics of what they're doing and you know that there's roughly an equal amount of time being spent on academics and they can talk to you about the programs they're using, you can't guarantee that there's the lack of appropriate instruction. Again, you may see underachievement, but you cannot definitively say that it's due to a specific learning disability. And a learning disability also cannot be due to limited English language proficiency. That's not to say that a student with limited English language proficiency cannot have a learning disability, but you can't make that determination solely based on reading assessment. The student would have to be evaluated in their native language, and other considerations would have to be taken into account. Okay, so before dyslexia or a learning disability can be diagnosed, again, you need to take into account the appropriate instruction, and then you also need to take into account whether a visual, motor, or hearing impairment could be at place, could be present. In those cases, if somebody has a visual issue, certainly there can be reading underachievement. But if it's due to the visual issue, the student would still likely be eligible for special education services, but the specific learning disability designation would not be the most appropriate designation. So for example, that student would likely be designated as a visually impaired student. Same thing goes for students with a hearing impairment. And then there can be some environmental or economic disadvantages where a student may have less exposure to reading material, but that too cannot be the sole reason why a student would qualify for a specific learning disability. Any questions? Yes.
So can you go back to that for a second?
Absolutely.
Because in the building where I work, those two words are appropriate instruction. Just a huge, huge issue for us in terms of fidelity of intervention, group size, intensity. We really struggle with that, trying to make sure that for every kid who comes to our intervention team, that what they receive, and we have an RTI process, but even there, you're looking at it as a progression to tiers. Theoretically, not only should the intervention be more intense, the group size should be smaller. And
Yes.
that's not necessarily the case for a lot of our kids. So we end up in a bit of a bind when can we honestly say these kids are getting both more intense intervention in smaller groups for a sufficient period of time.
So you're asking at what point?
I'm just wondering how you kind of wrestle with that too, I guess. The fidelity piece and the appropriate instruction piece.
I think the fidelity and the appropriate instruction piece is huge because I do think first you need to look at, in an RTI model, you need to look at what the intervention is. And again, that was a big part of what Heidi focused on last time. But I think the key piece is you really need to make sure the tier 1 instruction is appropriate and then make sure that tier 2 and tier 3 are being implemented the way they need to. And if a student is not responding, then you need to change the intervention. And I think that's a big piece. As far as numbers, it's supposed to be, I think generally speaking with the tier 2, I've seen that it's roughly 20 to 40 minutes 3 times per week, and then it's supposed to be daily for at least recommendations from the National Center for RTI, that it would be daily instruction. And they even say, one-on-one or very small group, but the realities of working in a school with budget issues, that's challenging to do. I think it's hard to find the qualified individuals who can deliver the instruction to meet the needs of the students. I think that's one of the challenges with the process. Other questions? We're going to move on to the referral process.
Clear as mud yet? Okay, questions, stand up, start talking. Because I know for those of you who aren't in schools, that had to have been just a lot. So actually, let's start like this. Could you please turn to someone sitting next to you for just 60 seconds, either clarify a point or talk about something more that you want to know, a question that you still have. Okay, 60 seconds, go. Can I see a show of hands if you are not a school staff member of some sort? Okay, thank you. All right, so what came up in your conversations? Anything that we need to talk about now, or do you want to hold and quiz us and see if we get there? What do you wonder?
I think it was really telling when not a single person, given the number of people who work in a school who are present, and not a single person could raise their hand to say what criteria is used to identify response or lack of response to intervention. We're going to now talk about what to do if you have concerns that a student, whether it be your own child or a student in your classroom, may have a learning disability.
Couldn't have been that important. Okay, so I guess what I wanted to just sort of reference before we move into this, because it's very related, is all of those pieces of the law and the exclusionary clauses that Michelle shared with us are complex and they're important. But that's about eligibility for special education. Okay, so that's not always necessarily our end goal or how we get help. So I just want to keep that in mind, as much as that seems like complicated and it's a gate to keep people out, and probably in many ways it is, that doesn't preclude us from working together to figure out what kids need. So we're going to talk now about when and where a child should be referred. And again, some of this actually comes up again later, so I'm not going to go too much into depth, but just to think about when data show lack of progress. Okay, so when a school is collecting response to intervention data on a child, when those data show no progress, that's when you start a referral. And I know that seems really obvious, but in private practice, I can't tell you how many times I've asked for the kids, DIBELS or STAR or whatever progress monitoring programs that they're using, and I get all those records and I see that the kid has flatlined for 2 years. That's a problem, right? So the whole point of collecting those data is to see if the child's making progress, and if there's not, to change something. And once you've changed it and you've done another good research-based intervention and they're still not making progress, then you need to do that referral. So that's a pretty clear one. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I think it's important to also look at the rate of improvement, though. It might seem pretty clear-cut when a student's not responding to data, but what if they are responding, but responding very slowly? I think those are the kids that fall more in the gray area, because is it a referral? Is it not a referral? What are we going to do with this student? So it's important when you're looking at the response to intervention data that you are looking at 2 different aspects of it. You do want to be looking at where the student is performing compared to the other kiddos in the class or in the grade, but you also want to be looking at the student's rate of improvement. And I think that's really important. Many times it's called the slope. And if you're using some of the programs like AimsWeb, they should be calculating that information for you if you're plugging your data right in. But I think it's more those slow responders that are a bit more challenging to determine at what point you turn that into a referral. If you've got a flat line, that's a referral. But if it's creeping up there, that's when it's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, and I would add that child, that the slow improver is probably a good kid to refer, because it doesn't mean anything except we're going to take a closer look at him, right? It's not, it's not a bad thing to refer for a closer look at a child. It's usually a good thing. In particularly, that's, again, in private practice, what I often see is, the parents will say, well, they keep telling me he's making progress in his interventions, but, he's 2 years behind now. That's a problem, right? You don't just watch them progress slowly, but let the gap get bigger, right? That's the whole point of watching progress, monitoring progress. So that's one of the biggest reasons, or when you will refer a child when progress isn't being made. But even just when someone's concerned about a child's skills or progress, right? So, maybe, I don't know, the parent, often this is going to come from a parent, right? The parent says, you know what, I'm concerned. And frankly, I've seen a lot of kids in private practice who weren't even getting response intervention or AIS or academic intervention support services in their schools. But they had a learning disability, they had dyslexia, right? But a lot of kids memorize enough words, particularly, we're doing a lot of sight words in kindergartens and first grades. But I'm testing kids that don't know any of the letter sounds and can't blend sounds together. But they've memorized enough words that they look okay on their progress monitoring, and the teachers will say, oh yeah, no, he knows 15 of our 50 sight words already, he's doing fine. But he knew it on this page and not on the next page, and he can't sound out a single word, and he doesn't know most of the letter sounds. That's still a problem, right? So whenever you're concerned as a parent or a teacher or other staff member, you may have reason to be concerned that doesn't involve progress monitoring data. You might just have a feeling about a kid. You might have a concern like the one I just described. Teachers, and we're going to talk very specifically later about teachers' roles, but again, you're watching that data. They're not responding to intervention. You're going to talk to your student support team or whatever it's called at your school, and as a parent, it depends on what your desired outcomes are. And I'm going to leave that at that because I'm going to talk about that one later. Is this with me too? Okay. So what's the process? So the first step is somebody makes that referral, right? So a referral is made to the Committee on Special Education or to the student support team who then refers, but somebody makes that referral for an assessment. The assessment's given, there's collaboration about the results. That goes back to what Michelle said about the multidisciplinary team. And by the way, parents are supposed to be an equal member on those decision-making teams. They're not just there to hear your report, they're there as an equal member of the team. Educational decisions are made. Then, so again, we're going to talk about some of this a little bit later. The other point that I wanted to just address here quickly was thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of waiting versus testing as soon as there's a concern. I think I've already made my feelings clear on that, and I'm curious if Michelle disagrees or wants to talk about a school perspective, but I would say waiting is almost never a good idea. I see it happen way too often. Yes, kids develop at different rates, but when you have a concern, there's usually a reason, right? People don't just kind of go like, I'm really worried about this kid. Nothing's wrong with him, but I'm worried anyway. I mean, we just don't do that. Like, there's a lot to be said for gut, right? Teacher gut, mother gut, whatever, right? There's a lot to be said for a gut feeling that something is off. So that's when you look at it. So I would say waiting's not usually a good idea.
But in the same vein, you cannot refer half of your class if half of your class is performing below grade level standards. So I do just need to caution that as the school psychologist who promised not to give somebody 900 referrals tomorrow, you do need to take gut into account, but you need to collect information, and that's where it's important to have a conversation with the parents and find out information and review the records of the child and see if there could be other factors contributing. And maybe you're getting history that, oh, the child didn't go to pre-K, and oh wait, the child was out for half the year in kindergarten because of a medical issue, and there could be other factors that could play a role, and so you need to take all of those pieces into account.
I'm going to turn it to you in 1 second, but I want to say that we're not as disagreeing as that sounded like. Absolutely. When I say gut and all of those things, that means look deeper, right? It doesn't necessarily mean make your school psychologist do the whole entire testing on them, but take a look at it. Figure out those things, because you won't know if they missed half of kindergarten unless you start looking at it.
Okay, so we already mentioned that the referral could come from a variety of different sources. And I just want to clarify, does everybody understand what a referral is? So it's a notification that you would like a particular student evaluated. And if you're a parent, you write out your request for testing and you deliver that to either the director of special education or the school. Oh,
Sorry.
apparently we're not discussing that.
No, we're doing it like soon, but give a whole slide on.
Okay. Or it could be referred from the teacher or the parent. I think I was supposed to cover this one. So from the school end, what should you do if you have concerns that a student in your classroom may have a learning disability? My first suggestion would be that you should go through the child's records and investigate and make sure you have as much information as possible. Then I would be talking with the parent and getting information from the parent and working collaboratively as a team with the parent. I would encourage you to go to your school psychologist and voice your concerns so that you could be working together. I would encourage you to make a referral to your pre-referral intervention team process. That's not to say that if a parent wants immediate answers, they can still write the letter and have the student tested, but the child should still be going through the SBIT or pre-referral team process, even as you're doing the evaluation. If the student is not eligible for services, you could still be progress monitoring how the student's doing in response to interventions through the SBIT team. Oh, and the final piece, it's very important as a teacher or an individual working in the schools that you know the laws associated with special education, whether you're a general education teacher or a special education teacher or a reading teacher. Click on, and I think we included the links for both IDEA and the Part 200 regs. You can print those out, the information's in there, and it spells out all of the definitions and the specific guidelines. And that's important, you should know that as a professional working in the school.
How many people have heard of Child Find? Okay, so in the special education law in IDEA, there's a clause called Child Find, and what that means is that all school personnel or schools have a responsibility to find any child who may have a disability. That actually extends from age 3 to 21. So for teachers, you have a legal responsibility to identify and to bring your concern to your building team if you suspect a student might have a disability. And I think that this is important to think about because, and in fact, this whole presentation arose from a very animated conversation that we had in a board meeting about kind of how these things happen and don't happen, and people were saying, oh no, in my school, we're not allowed to make a referral, or we're not allowed to tell the parent to refer their child for special education, right? So that's why we have this whole thing about building culture and norms. But in fact, you not only can and should do that, you have a legal obligation to do that. So if you have a concern about a child, you should be talking to the parent, you should be talking to your building, student support team, school-based intervention team, whatever it's called in your building. That is your legal responsibility. And so, unfortunately, in this age of limited resources, school districts want to keep down their numbers and their referrals, and they want to have a tighter control on that. And so the culture in many, many buildings, and I saw a lot of heads nodding, was no, you don't tell the parent that you fear their child may have a learning disability, and you don't ever say the word dyslexia, and you don't suggest to the parent that they make a referral to special education. And again, I'm not going to tell you what to do in your job except to say that you are in fact legally, and I would add morally, obligated to do something. So whether your style is to try to change the building norms or to subvert them or whatever your style is, keep in mind, and I think that was why the other piece that we had was, what do you do when there's a clash between what your building culture or norm is around referrals to special education, or even just conversations around, I think your child has a disability, when that clashes with what you believe to be the right thing? How do you handle that? So I'd like to do another, maybe not even quite 60 seconds, but you have to promise me you'll come back faster. Promise? Okay? So talk to somebody sitting next to you about this whole piece of Child Find and the building culture and norm, and what do you do when those things are in conflict with each other? All right, come back. You promised me you'd come back faster. I wouldn't have to scream 3 times. Thank you. All right, anybody have anything from their conversations that they'd like to share? Did you solve the problem? Because it is a problem, isn't it? Did you solve it? We're good? We can go out and change the world? All right, fine, I won't make you share. All right, then I wanted to talk about the parents' role in the process. So this is interesting. First of all, to know that there is the whole pre-referral process, there is response to intervention, all of those things may or may not be helpful. They were designed, by the way, and again, Heidi covered this beautifully in her talk last time, those things were designed to get kids appropriate help faster. The discrepancy model that Michelle talked to you about, we used to call the wait to fail model, right? A kid had to fail badly enough to qualify for services, and the whole point of response to intervention was to get help to kids sooner. It's not playing out that way. in most places. There's a lot of research that says, in fact, it's not helping our kids with disabilities for the most part. So if a parent wants to bypass that, they can bypass that. If a parent puts a request in writing that they would like their child tested, that evaluation has to occur within 60 days. I also always advise parents to put in their letter, please consider this letter my consent to evaluate. Because another way that schools buy themselves some time is to take the letter and then dilly-dally and then get a consent to evaluate out.
However, according to the law, consent can never be really conferred until they've been given their due process rights and the actual form is signed.
Very good point. So if you didn't hear John, consent to evaluate isn't really conferred until the parents have been given their due process. And so there's a big, huge booklet that the schools give the parents for their rights. So technically that doesn't happen, but I still advise parents to say that. And things will move along a little bit more quickly.
The law also states that schools are only supposed to do that for 10 days.
Okay, and that's true. So the law also says schools can only dilly-dally. It's just like that in the law too, you should look it up. But that the schools need to get the consent to evaluate within 10 days.
Or call the parent in for a conversation to discuss why they don't feel tested.
Or call the parent in to discuss why they don't feel the testing is appropriate. That happens a lot. Again, part of my role as a private person is to empower parents. You know, nothing against the schools, and I know, of course, I mean, I've worked in them, right? I know that I unfortunately see the worst case scenario, right? You don't generally, I mean, not always, but generally people don't end up in private practice evaluations if they've had luck with their schools. So I find that parents are generally not informed well of their rights, but rather talked out of things that they feel pretty strongly about or flat out refused. But oftentimes I think, you know, so again, as school professionals, it's our job to support the parent in supporting their child. And so it doesn't always mean doing exactly what they want. I realize that, of course. But it does mean that you're empowering rather than just saying, oh, well, no, we first must go through this process. It's not true. Okay, so be truthful. Say, we'd really like to go through this process because we think this would benefit your child, right? So be truthful. So when a parent is thinking about making a referral, the things that I ask them to think about, or the questions that I always ask when I'm talking to a parent of a child who hasn't had an identified disability yet, is to think about their history. And by that I mean both the child's individual history and your family history. Because it turns out, if someone in your family tree has dyslexia, the chances of your child having dyslexia are pretty high. So I take that pretty seriously. And I will look at those kids at a very young age. Because the sooner we can capture a kid, even if they just look like they're at risk for dyslexia, if we can get them the right interventions, we can hopefully make that not turn into a diagnosable dyslexia or learning disability at least. I also ask parents to really pay close attention to the child's progress, and when we're considering grades, one thing that I think parents tend to pick up on better than schools that I've seen is that what's the difference between the homework grades and the test grades? Right? So the kid who's passing because he has 100 on every homework because mom and dad checked them, and by the way, that's what I do with my dyslexic kid, right? I'm going to check everything, and if you turn something in that wasn't checked and that's graded, that's the only time I've used the word stupid with one of my kids. I said, that's just stupid because you have an opportunity to do this and to do this well, and you need to do this well to balance out your test grades, right? So you need to know that parents are helping kids at home with the homework. They're checking, I mean, I didn't know parents are doing it. That's obviously not a good thing, but they're checking it, and they're making sure the kids are turning in correct homework grade. Why wouldn't they? It's not just about the grade, but they want to make sure that the kid is learning it and doing it correctly, right? What's the point of doing homework wrong? So you want to compare homework grades to test grades. You want to look at their areas of strength and weakness. I also always suggest to parents that you observe, document, and support, but not too much, right? There are some specialists or researchers in the area that suggest parents withdraw support, stop helping with homework, stop checking homework, stop studying with them, so that the child then does crash and burn. I just can't as a parent, recommend that. I don't think that necessarily helps anyone. It may make it easier to get through the hoop, but that's not a hoop I want to jump through. Then when we talk about the where you make the referral, that's when I say it depends on the level of your concern. If you want to say, go directly to a test, do not pass go, then that's when you want to put it in writing, right? If your child is young and you're just concerned, you have some feelings, or there's, a family history of dyslexia and you've seen some things, but she's kind of doing okay, then you just talk to your teacher. You talk to your teacher. I mean, you should always talk to your teacher first anyway, but you talk to the teacher, you see if they have concerns. If they don't, why don't they? Right? Because again, lots of times what comes out is, oh, well, he knows an appropriate number of sight words. Have you seen him sound out any words? How does he do with nonsense words, right? So find out why the teacher doesn't have any concerns, if they don't have concerns, or what their concerns are. If they've talked to, by the way, lots of times teachers have already talked to their student support team. The parents don't have to be notified of that. So the teacher may be concerned as well, and you just haven't connected yet. So it's a great idea to start with your teacher. You can go directly to your building or special education team. You can ask, for a referral directly to your student support team. Or as I said, if you don't want to pass go and you want to go directly to test, then you put it in writing.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry, what is your experience with high school referrals? So we're a group of high school educators, and we have students who seem to have slipped through the cracks throughout the years. And now they're freshmen in high school, and they're reading at 4th and 5th grade level. So we struggle with that, because then the parents don't want them to be identified necessarily. The kids don't want to be identified this late in their high school experience. So what's your experience with referrals for high school level students?
Can you repeat the question?
So she asked, what is your experience working with high school students, some of whom may have slipped between the cracks, they're getting to their freshman year, and they're reading at a 4th or 5th grade level, but their parents have concerns about them being identified this late in the game, and the students don't want to be designated. And having worked with high school students at a high school before, what I can tell you is that there can be a stigma associated with going to the resource room or needing that extra help. But I think the important thing that I typically try to do when I'm working with a high school student, even just for the assessment process, is talk with them about what aspects of school are easy for them, what aspects of school are more challenging for them. Many times they already know that there's an issue because they know they're reading at a 4th and 5th grade level and the rest of their peers are not. So I think it's really important to talk with them about what their learning strengths and weaknesses are. When I introduce an assessment, I explain that the reason we're doing this is because we want to identify areas that might be more challenging and what we can do to help make school not so difficult for you or make it easier for you. Because for a lot of these kids, they're getting by, but they're doing 3 times the amount of work in order to get by. And sometimes students just hearing that, I've had kids break down in tears to know that there's a reason or a cause behind what has made them have to work that much harder.
Can I just repeat?
Definitely.
Brianna, did I do? Yeah. Is this even working?
You have to click the button, touch the button.
Yeah.
No, there's a button.
That I'm pushing.
There, yeah, you did it.
Yeah, I want to add something about high school, which is that even if we do get those kids identified as having learning disability in reading, like Sheila said, in high school, there's even less of a chance there's somebody on staff who's going to know how to remediate that effectively.
Yeah.
So the identification of the learning disability is only helpful if you have teachers on staff who have the professional knowledge to provide the instruction that that child needs.
It's not only helpful. That's the most helpful scenario. And let's be frank, we don't always have teachers on staff in elementary buildings who can address dyslexia, right? So it's not the only way it's helpful, it's the most helpful way. But they can still get accommodations, right? And that would be important.
Absolutely. And then Another thing.
That's your button again.
I'm pushing the button.
Oh, okay.
Another thing that's particularly helpful is if your district has some sort of system for tracking the actual instruction that a child has had, right? So some districts are able to go into a database and look. So maybe we know that there's that tier 1 instruction in kindergarten through 4th grade wasn't great. Maybe it wasn't evidence-based, and then maybe that child started to get some intervention. Well, what were those interventions, right? And between 5th grade and 9th grade or 10th grade. And, geez, maybe this child doesn't have dyslexia. Maybe this child just never had appropriate reading instruction. And once they're in high school, the only way to help is if you can find somebody who knows how to teach them. So that happens too. Just saying.
But I also wanted to add that in private practice, that is, we do see a lot of that, those kids that are bright, and of course, as Heidi says, it's harder for us, I think, outside of school to tease out the I always try to figure out what instruction the kids had, but it's harder for me to tease that out. But I still say, there are some pretty clear red flags for dyslexia. So I see a lot of kids in that 9th, 10th grade area where they're just now really unable to keep up. Frankly, for my own kid, it was 7th grade when, they had to read an entire chapter in the social studies book and fill out a study guide, and I was spending 2 hours a night reading him the chapter because it would take him 6 hours on his own, right? So that's when those things tend to really, when the rubber hits the road for some kids, if the disability is mild and or they've just worked extra hard, or the expectations weren't maybe that high, whatever those things are. So those kids do come up quite a bit in private practice.
And I would still encourage the student and parent to pursue the evaluation, even if they decide as a family not to pursue the special education services and designation. I think it's important to have that identification. And they may still be eligible for accommodations, which would help the student perform better.
Absolutely. But we really, and it's a major mission of the Reading League, is to make sure that teachers pre-K through 12th grade have a knowledge base around how to teach kids who don't know how to read, regardless of the reason.
We are going to show a brief clip. I apologize in advance because Bill Cosby is in the clip. But what I'd like you to do as you watch this, I want you to look for what are the accuracies in Theo's meeting with his school psychologist, not quite sure what her role is, and what is not accurate. And please note too that this clip was from 1989.
Theo, I've looked over your essays and notebooks from class.
I hope you can read everything.
Well, that's one of the problems. Your notes are incomplete and poorly organized.
They are?
Yes, and your writing has a lot of structural and mechanical errors, although your ideas are good. Theo, I think that you should be tested for dyslexia.
Dyslexia, what's that?
It's a disorder in which people see letters backwards or in a different sequence, but Theo doesn't see letters backwards.
That's only one form of it, Mrs. Huxtable. Dyslexia is a special way of seeing things. I like to call it a different kind of mind.
What kind of mind?
In Theo's case, first rate. He has the brain power. He just has a glitch in the way he takes in information.
A glitch?
Yes, he just has a problem in the way that he processes language.
Does that mean that there's nothing we can do?
Not at all. There are specialists who can help dyslexics overcome their learning problems. All he has to do is work with the program they've set up.
You mean if my son does what they want him to, he can be helped?
Yeah.
All right, well, it's dyslexia. Now fix it.
Don't jump to conclusions just yet. Theo, when you're called upon in class, do you have difficulty finding the correct words to express yourself?
Yeah. I know what I want to say, but I have a hard time getting it straight in my mind.
Look, he's got it. Let's fix it.
Dr. Huxtable, I'll need to do a series of diagnostic tests.
When can I take these tests?
You can take them first thing in the morning.
Son, I hope you flunk with flying colors.
Dad, I'll do my best to let you down.
Please.
Right.
Hi.
Hey, Miss Roscoe gave me the test results back.
And?
What did she say?
You guys, I'm dyslexic.
So I'd like you to take 60 seconds and discuss what from that video clip you believe is an accurate portrayal of dyslexia and what might be inaccurate. Anything? Yes.
Dyslexia is not letter flipping.
That would be an inaccurate.
Yeah, it's inaccurate.
Okay.
So the mother's conception is inaccurate, but
Yes. So dyslexia is not flipping of the letters, and they did specifically say that he sees letters backwards, and that is dyslexics do not see information backwards. It's not a visual issue. Okay. Other accuracies or inaccuracies? Patrice.
They mentioned the mechanical and structural difficulties with writing.
Mechanical and structural difficulties with writing. Yes, that can be a component of dyslexia. Anything else? They talked about the need for Theo to undergo a series of diagnostic tests, and that is something that is accurate, that in order to diagnose dyslexia, there's no single test. You can't do a blood sample and you get it. So you do need to go through the diagnostic tests. Anything else that was inaccurately portrayed? Or accurately portrayed? Yes?
That he is going to be fixed or cured entirely afterwards, because even afterwards, he's still going, although they'll be able to give him strategies, they're going to have to reteach him everything. He knows up to that point he's going to struggle a lot to be able to, or he's going to have to struggle even after he's learned those strategies.
Well, yes, and I think what you're saying too ties into the question that was raised over here, because clearly he's in high school or an adolescent, and so he's gone several years without having the reading instruction that he's needed. Okay, anything else that stands out? Yes?
I love that the kid came home with the results, like hopefully that would never happen. Like getting a spelling test back, I got my dyslexia.
Maybe he's 18, you don't know. Okay, we're going to, I can figure out how to do this. Oh, apparently that was not it. Okay. We're going to move into what a school-based assessment might entail. And so I'm going to be throwing some acronyms out at you. If you know that this test is used at your school, please raise your hands. So first I want to make the distinction between broadband achievement tests and more narrowband achievement tests. And I think that is really a big distinction between what may happen at the school setting versus in a more private type of evaluation. But I should point out that school psychologists and special education teachers are qualified to give many of the more narrowband assessments. And in some districts, I think that does occur, but not universally. So a broadband test is one that measures many different facets of academic achievement. So which school districts, or raise your hand if your school uses the WIAT 3, the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test. Raise your hand if your school district uses the Woodcock-Johnson 4. Okay, how about the KTEA? Any others I'm missing? So they're more overarching measures that have particular subtests that look at reading, mathematics, and written expression, but it's usually 3 or 4 subtests pertaining to a specific area, and it may not go into specific extreme depth in a particular domain. Okay? So a narrow band achievement test covers information more thoroughly. I don't want to say thoroughly. Basically, it goes into more depth to try to uncover where the problem is occurring. So raise your hand if your school district administers the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test. Okay, good. How about the CTOP, Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing? How about the Gray Oral Reading Test, the GORT? Test of Word Reading Efficiency, the Tower. Okay, and here's the new one that's out, the Pfeiffer Assessment of Reading, the FAR. No, oh, one hand, good. Okay, so those measures are more comprehensively focused on a specific area. And the goal is to really delve into where, for example, the reading process is breaking down. So with the Tower, that's easy because there's only 2 subtests. Is the child having greater difficulty with their sight word reading efficiency or their nonsense words decoding efficiency? With this CTOP, are the deficits in phonological awareness, phonological memory, or rapid naming? With the Pfeiffer Assessment of Reading, it breaks information down into whether the difficulties are occurring from a phonological standpoint, an orthographic standpoint, or a morphological standpoint. So it really gives you some good information that can then drive instruction. Okay? Now, when we talk about a school-based assessment, I think it's important to make the distinction between 3 different types of assessments. So there's criterion reference testing, which looks at whether or not the student has mastered a specific criterion. Okay, so for example, for the modules, whether or not they, oh, thanks. Yep, I'm off slide. I'm going rogue. So whether a student has mastered material. There's curriculum-based assessment, and Eric Dibble's Ames Web falls into that category, which are small snapshots of what the child is doing in the curriculum, and they're brief and they're capable of being repeated, and they're good for progress monitoring tools because they give you information in a fast fashion, and you can use that information to guide your instruction. And then there are standardized assessments, which are developed by companies who spend lots of money administering these tests to hundreds or thousands of individuals at certain age levels and grade levels that match the US Census. And what standardized assessments allow you to do is compare a child's performance to other individuals his or her age or his or her grade. The tests have to be delivered the exact same way. You can't deviate in your delivery of the testing instructions. That's why they're very scripted. Yeah.
Just an observation, with the standardized tests, something that I'm seeing more of now, the tests that you had mentioned, the KTA, the Woodcock-Johnson, they're not mapped to the Common Core Learning Standards, so we're seeing a lot of kids who look okay on those standardized assessments, but are floundering mightily within the Common Core. And some of the other tests you had mentioned are good for getting to the core of some of the reading issues, but those broadband standardized assessments, we're seeing more and more kids who look fine on those that are not doing fine in the classroom.
Definitely, and you'll notice on your table, and we think we spread them out, but there should be one sheet that on one side had some examples. These tests are copyrighted. I really don't need Pearson coming after me. So we created items that are similar to what would be on Wyatt 3 subtests, but then on the back of that sheet is a sample case. And on that sample case, the student has an overall composite score that falls in the average range. I'm going to be talking about ranges in just a minute, but I think we might be delving into what you're talking about, Carlo, and just give us 2 minutes, okay? Any other questions? Okay, so really briefly, and then we're going to take a break, I want to talk about interpretation of scores. Okay, so again, I'm referring to standardized assessments, and in particular, I'm focused on individualized assessment measures that one would take with a school psychologist one-on-one, or with a reading teacher one-on-one, or with a special education teacher. Okay, and so the way these tests are broken up is there are subtests. So for the Wyatt 3, we've got under the reading domain, we've got word reading, pseudo-word decoding, reading comprehension, oral reading fluency, early reading skills. And those are the subtests. And then it forms this composite or domain score that's the reading composite. So the subtest scores yield scaled scores. Scaled scores have a mean of 10 and standard deviation of 3, so scores between 7 and 13 are considered average. The composite score is a standard score. Those scores have a mean of 100 and standard deviation of 15. So scores between 85 and 115 are typically considered average, but you need to consult the manual of your specific test. Some tests break it down into a standard score of 90 to 109 is an average score, and 110 to 119 is an above average score. So each test, standardized test, should have a manual that gives you the table that describes the classification based on the score. A percentile rank needs to be distinguished from percentage correct. I think sometimes people see that, especially parents, and they confuse the two. Percentage correct is the number of items the student answers correctly out of the number of possible items delivered. That shouldn't be in any assessment report. A percentile rank is if you were to rank order how a student performs compared to other individuals, his or her age, then where that student's performance lies. So a student who's performing at the 33rd percentile is performing at or above 33% of other individuals his or her age on that particular skill. Okay, you might have seen stay nines. Stay 9 stands for standard 9, and it basically breaks performance down into 9 different areas with scores of 1 to 3 are below average, 4 to 6 are average, and 7 to 9 are above average. And then there's the grade and age equivalent. Everybody loves those. Okay, what's the problem with grade and age equivalents? At the younger levels, those skills are developing rapidly. And so you're going to see greater growth with those scores. They are not reliable and valid scores. There are psychometric issues with those scores. I know people still put them in reports. I cringe when people put them in reports. I don't allow my graduate students, because I teach a psychoeducational class, and they get graded down for putting those in their reports. So they really shouldn't be in there. I think people like them because, oh, I can understand that. Grade 5.1, so 5th grade, 1 month in. But it's not a valid score. So if you need to cling to something, that's not the best score to do it with. It means that you perform.
They didn't hear my question.
Oh, okay. She wants an explanation of what a grade equivalent or age equivalent is. So it's giving you information according to that a child might perform at the 5th grade level 1 month in.
Yeah, no, but it's not, so that's how people interpret it, right? And that's the problem. What it actually means is that the child performed at the median or average of what a 5th grader did on that problem set. So if a 3rd grader has a grade equivalent of 5.1, that does not mean they were doing 5th grade work. It means their performance on the work they did do was similar to that of how a 5th grader would have done on that 3rd grade work. A little circular.
And the median is different at the different age and grade levels, and that's part of the problem as opposed to an even distribution. So that's why there's this slide, which kind of breaks the information that I just described to you down so you can see it according to the normal curve. And I would encourage you, PAR, I don't know what it stands for, is it just PAR? Oh, they actually sell a copy. So for anybody who does administer standardized tests and do review results with parents, I have one of these normal curves that they actually have interpretation in both English and on the back in Spanish. And it's nice because it just gives a visual depiction where it breaks it down, and I believe it even includes ranges on the form. And so this kind of shows you for subtest scores, or scaled scores versus standard scores. And the PowerPoint will be available, right? We put all of the PowerPoints up on the Reading League website. So if you want this, I believe it's or you can just go to www.assessmentpsychology.com, which is where I got this from. Okay, we are going to take a quick break here, right?
Yeah, can I talk about that? Because we made
Yes.
a decision back there.
No, we're not, just kidding.
No, we are.
All right, here's the deal, people. You need to buy more raffle tickets so we can do more awesome things. You need to be back here in 5 minutes, please, I beg of you. Unless you don't want to know the difference between a disability and eligibility, but you really do, right? And you want to know what 504 is and how a kid qualifies for a 504 plan? So if you want to know all of these things, you'll be back in 5 minutes, and you'll also buy lottery tickets while you're out.
Okay, 60 seconds is up.
Okay, so we want to talk about what's the difference, because this is, I think, a sticking point for a lot of people, right? A child may have a disability but not be eligible for special education. In fact, it happens way more often than you would realize. So remember, we talked about special education law being categorical. So a child has to fit into one of those 13 categories, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they're dyslexic, but they're still not eligible. In fact, that happens quite a bit. It's sometimes a tough pill to swallow, frankly, right? Your child is struggling, they've been diagnosed with dyslexia, but they don't qualify for special education. And that does happen sometimes. So what happens then? What are the other resources available to kids who have a disability but are not eligible for special education services? So that was just like too low for me.
It's fine.
Okay. Well, Section 504 is how, if you hear about a kid having a 504 plan, it's referring to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is actually a non-discrimination law. So what it says is that children can't be, or people can't be discriminated against because of a disability. And disability is defined in a much broader sense. So disability is anything that impairs a major life function. So for children, a major life function is learning. So if learning is impaired, then they may qualify for a 504 plan. The question is, how do we define whether or not learning is impaired? Of course, as in most of the laws, we have very little guidance there, but it generally gets interpreted as the child. In fact, there is some language in the law that says, schools must afford students with disabilities equal opportunity to obtain the same result, gain the same benefit, or reach the same level of achievement as students without disabilities. So then people or schools interpret that to mean that if the child is performing at the average rate of a typical peer, the child of his peers without disabilities, then his learning is not impaired. That's a strict interpretation of the law. Some districts follow that. Others are a lot more flexible. Because a 504 plan generally just allows a child to have some accommodations. So for example, a child with dyslexia, for example, the high schoolers that you were mentioning, right? If a child has gotten to 9th grade and just gets diagnosed with dyslexia, maybe that's happening outside of school, or maybe it's happening in school, it means they've had some pretty good coping mechanisms, right? They've figured a way through this. Ideally, there would be somebody at their high school who's trained in systematic, explicit, scientifically based reading intervention, and their dyslexia would be fixed like Theo's. But the chances of that happening are unfortunately slim until the Reading League accomplishes its goal. But that child, again, has figured out his way, and so with some extra time or books on tape, those are ways that kids can be accommodated for under a 504 plan. So again, it actually happens more often than you would realize that a child has a disability but is not eligible for special education services, hopefully is at least eligible for a 504 accommodation plan. Okay, so other thing, I'm not even going to talk about these, I don't think. You can see them, some of the important definitions are in your knowledge sheets, but basically, other ways that kids get a diagnosis is through a clinical assessment. The DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual put out by the American Psychological Association, has this definition for specific learning disorder. That note under there is their terminology, not mine, just to be clear, but that's how they handle the diagnosis of dyslexia. Better still are definitions from the International Dyslexia Association. This is in your knowledge sheet. What I like about this one is it's very specific and it helps guide practice and intervention. It helps guide assessment, it helps guide practice and intervention. This breaks it out even more to really think about the parts of language and learning that are impacted by dyslexia. Okay, so I flew through a bunch of things. Any questions? Still mud? All right. So what does a private assessment entail? And again, I think Michelle kind of touched upon a number of these things as she was talking because it's hard to separate them. Of course, it's very similar to a school assessment. The difference being that most often a private evaluation is going to go into more depth. We're not seeing the same numbers of kids in the same time frame. The school building has constraints on a school psychologist. I spend a lot of time with a child, and so I will often start with the broadband achievement test that Michelle showed you, but I will never, ever, ever stop there, right? And so that sheet that she referred you to with the scores on the back, where it said, the child had this score on word reading and this score on pseudo word reading and this score on reading comprehension, and overall she's average. Looks okay, cool, see you later, right? Did you agree or disagree with that assessment? Okay, why did you disagree? Pseudo words. What's important about their performance on the pseudo word? Okay, so that child has memorized some words but can't decode them. Good. What else did you notice? Comprehension stronger. We got a bright little kiddo who can figure out passages, has some good background knowledge. Come on, it doesn't take that much to do well on these comprehension tests. Some kids are going to bomb, but a lot of kids that have pretty significant reading problems aren't going to bomb those. You got to dig deeper. So again, we look at the wide-ranging ones, but then we go very much in depth. My baby's the FAR, the Five for Assessment of Reading. And I get so much information from that, and what I like about that a lot is that it very much gives me specific information for guiding instructional practice and guiding accommodations and interventions.
I think that answers your question, Carlos. So if you do find that you are getting average scores, but you still suspect from data from other sources that the student isn't responding to intervention, or the parents have concerns, or the teacher has concerns, and the average Wyatt scores aren't jiving with what they're seeing in the classroom, then I would encourage you to delve deeper into, and you have the FAR, so that's an excellent assessment to really break down reading, and it is good for students who are younger, who there are going to be floor effects with many of these broadband achievement tests. And so tests like the Pfeiffer and some of the other narrowband assessment measures don't have, they have a greater floor. I don't know if I answered that question.
Well, I also think, though, it's incumbent on the people who make these tests to have a sample of items that mirror what's going on in the classroom and get away from this notion that we can create tests that don't dovetail at all what's going on in the Common Core, and that's okay. Because it's not.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a quick counterpoint, though, and that is that when we consider disability, that we look at our test scores, grade 3, the Common Core and our assessments are actually criterion reference measures that are arbitrarily set by the government. And if we look at the percentage of students passing, a lot of times it's actually not a very high rate. That doesn't mean it's a disability. What it means is that we're still adapting to that. And if we're saying there's not that mirror over, it actually has to do, I think, a lot more with what people are doing in terms of dictating the curriculum, not with an individual disability. And I think that's the importance of looking at published norm reference tests, because we're actually comparing, we're making intuition about neuropsychological functioning, not necessarily response to a government prescribed entity.
Good point. Yeah, and actually kind of dovetailing off of John's point there about making a neuropsychological decision on a neuropsychological basis, the Pfeiffer assessment of reading gives us good data for that. Another thing that I do in private practice that, I know some school psychologists do, but not a whole lot or not all the time, is I do some pretty in-depth tests of memory and learning. I look at executive functions, I look at sustained auditory attention and concentration. So all of the different things that kind of impact how a kid approaches tasks. And that's the other thing that I do, is really spend a lot of time figuring out how they go about what they do, so that when I have a report, they're usually 30 pages long, because I talk about what was hard, why it was hard, what strategies the kid did. When I brought them back and taught them some strategies, how did they do then, right? So, again, I have the luxury to be able to spend more time with them and to do a much more in-depth kind of job. And so sometimes that's important. But sometimes it's not. We don't even need that. So when is it necessary, right? And I will tell you the honest truth, and I know Michelle does this too when she's dealing with private practice. I always tell the parents their rights, right? All the stuff that we just taught you, here's how you get an evaluation for your child. And they'll say to me, well, will it be as good? I don't know, right? I don't know your school psychologist. I think if Michelle was doing it, or some of the school psychologists here, it probably would, right? So you need to know that you have that right. The school will do that evaluation, and that is a fabulous place to start. Now, a lot of parents choose not to start that way. That's fine. There's a lot. I'm working with a family currently that just didn't want, they feel the stigma about disability. They want the information first before they decide to share it with the school. People have their own reasons, and there are times when it's worth it and times when it's not. And only a family can figure that out for themselves. It's an expensive process, and sometimes I flat out tell the parent, you know what? Why don't you try some tutoring for a year? Get some really good systematic phonologically based reading instruction, see how he responds. Maybe your money's better spent there, right? So there's a lot of times where it's not the first choice. Cases that I get, and I certainly do get plenty of initials, because again, people have their reasons for wanting to do that. They'll get a lot more information. So again, I think it depends also on what your end goal is. If your end goal is just, I want to know if he qualifies for special education, you're going to be fine most likely with your school assessment. If you want to know more about your child's strengths as a learner, you may or may not get that from your school assessment, again, just because of the luxury of time that I have to be able to do that. The other thing that I noticed too, though, that is a difference, unfortunately, often, clearly not in this group, but all too often, I see the kind of results that we put on that sheet for you interpreted as everything is fine. All too often. Kid with a alphabet writing fluency of 120, but writing scores in the 70s comes out average, and they say, writing's average, right? And I think sometimes that happens because we have, teacher doing one part of it and school psychologist doing another part of it. So we need to be sure, as a multidisciplinary team in the schools, that we're looking at all of the data and making smart decisions, right? So when is it worth it? Okay, so I think the other thing to think about when a private evaluation is worth it is when a clinician has expertise in the area of need. So for people who are concerned that their child has dyslexia, whether I'm a second opinion or a first opinion, often that's a good choice for them because that's my particular area of expertise. I have a lot of training, I have a lot of experience. I've had a lot of experience testing kids with dyslexia, living with kids with dyslexia, and teaching kids with dyslexia. So when a clinician has an experience set that's important to your outcomes and your goals, then it might be a good choice. When you want an unbiased opinion outside of L, I said that, and when your child's been falling between the cracks, I'd say that's probably one of my more common ones, is the child's been tested at school, or the school's been saying, no, we don't want to test them, but they're kind of that kid falling between the cracks that we've talked about. How can you finance it? This is, I think, the last point that I really want to make, because people don't know this. This was another thing that came out of a conversation we had as a board that people don't know. You can private pay, right? And that is pretty much my most common client is a private pay. Most psychologists doing this work in private practice do not contract directly with insurance companies. The reimbursement rate is very low, and so most people just don't do that. There are a couple, I think, not sure, in the area that do that. But you can private pay. You can, if the person contracts with insurance, your insurance may or may not cover some of that or all of that. For people who don't contract with insurance, like Michelle and I, you could, if the person is a licensed psychologist, which they should be in order to do private practice, you may be able to submit for reimbursement for out-of-network costs. Most insurances suck at that. I have had some clients have fabulous luck. Most do not, but that is an option, and I help parents look into that.
One thing that I always encourage parents to do, and I feel it's so important, and you, as many of you as educators, should encourage if parents are looking at pursuing a private evaluation, they should really shop around. They should talk to different evaluators, because some private evaluations are not good. And I've had parents who came to me and they said, well, we spent $3,000 on this evaluation, but the methods that were used were questionable. The results, given that the standardization wasn't followed, were therefore questionable. And just because a private evaluation is conducted does not mean that the school district is mandated to comply with the recommendations. The information must be considered. So it must be considered, but if there are grave concerns with the measures used, which in one particular case I definitely had that, then you consider it, but then you don't. Keep that in mind, because you will find some people who are doing quick evaluations, short evaluations, and they should really ask questions about, parents should ask what the evaluation will entail, obviously the costs associated with it, and also, the waiting list, because some places have pretty long waiting lists. Like my clinic waiting list, we're booking next January. So, looking
And I would add to that when you have those conversations, and I also encourage people to call around, that you find out what Michelle said, what it entails, right? So what do they give you, right? So what do I get for this? You test my kid, what kind of report do I get, what's in it? Make sure that they will follow through with the school, and so I think in that regard, somebody with experience and practice with school, who understands what happens in schools, who understands educational law, those kinds of things are really important.
Do they participate in the CSE?
Will they participate in the CSE meeting, right? So what kinds of suggestions are in the report? Will they participate in the CSE meeting? What's their follow through with you? I generally tell parents, you own me after this, I am your child's advocate for as long as you need me. And that tends to kind of, people will go, oh, because it's a hard process on your own. So make sure you find out what you're getting, because again, I've seen people, I did have someone call me when I first opened the practice, and it was somebody I knew, and she said, my kid just needs an evaluation for his accommodations in college, and it's been 3 years and he needs them. How much does it cost? And I told her, and she said, oh, well, the last guy only charged us like $300 or something. And I said, you should go get that. Because you know what, the kid didn't, and he just needed to recertify his accommodations, right? She actually said that the person spent about an hour with him, and I was like, well, I don't think they got even one full test done. That's interesting. So you really need to find out what you get, what you're getting. Michelle already talked about the clinic, I think. So last point, actually the $1 million question, dyslexia, disability, eligibility, or both, right? And it's unanswerable. We've addressed it kind of on and on throughout, so I'm not even going to talk about it. I guess the one point I want to say though is, does it matter? Parents are really hyped up, and there's a lot of advocacy right now for using the word dyslexia, and I'm seeing schools just slap it on. In that case, I would say no, it doesn't matter, because that's not helpful. What we want is a deep understanding of what dyslexia is, how to assess it, and more importantly, how to teach to it. And if that doesn't exist, I don't care if the word dyslexia is in there or not. A lot of parents care. I mean, I actually kind of do care, but what I'm saying is it's not going to help you, right? It's not going to help you if your school doesn't know what to do with it just to slap that name on there. So does it matter if they call their child a child with a learning disability versus a child with a learning disability, aka dyslexia? Only if they're going to do something about it. And they should, right? All right, we need to do the quiz.
So we're gonna review the answers for the quizzes, and Maria sweetened up the prizes because we were just gonna give these Smarties, but now we have $5 gift certificates to Delta Sonic. So let's see how you did. School districts can refuse to test because the student has not had academic intervention services. That is false. School districts can refuse to test a student because his grades are passing. That too is false. School districts can refuse to test because my child is too young. False. Okay, kindergarten, first grade, still false. A parent cannot request testing within 60 days from the end of the school year or over the summer. The reason we created this quiz is because these are the things we are hearing from parents, and in some cases, these are the things we are hearing from teachers or people who work in schools. The answer is false. Even if school psychologists or special education teachers do not work over the summer, a school district cannot say that they will not evaluate. That 60-day timeline still applies. They may need to hire out, but they need to conduct the evaluation. Dyslexia can be diagnosed in the school. That is true. You saw that it is in regulations. School districts can limit the amount they will spend on an independent educational evaluation. We get this question quite a bit. The information is true, but I actually was talking with somebody from the state ed department about this. The majority, so what happens if a parent requests an independent educational evaluation? And I just want to quickly point this out because I don't think we covered this. That if a parent...
Independent district expense I didn't do. Can you please tell them that?
Okay, yes. So if a parent disagrees with the findings of the school-based evaluation, a parent is entitled to an independent educational evaluation at school district expense. They must disagree with aspects from the evaluation. The school may ask them what they disagree with, but here's the interesting thing. According to the law, the parent doesn't need to say what they disagree with. And the school district must provide the parents with a list of private evaluators. They should be alive because many of these lists are very outdated.
I'm collecting lists, they're really fun.
And the people on the list should be qualified and certified to do the type of evaluation you're looking for. So if they're seeking an independent speech evaluation, it shouldn't all be psychologists, and vice versa.
And you don't have to pick from their list.
You do not have to pick from their list, but related to the cost, many school districts cap the cost of an evaluation, and then I'll take John's question. So according to the representative from the state ed department, the cost that a school district is offering to pay needs to be covered by most of the people on that list. So if a school district's like, well, I'll pay $500, but nobody on that list will conduct an evaluation for $500, then that's not sufficient. The majority of people on that list should be covered at the price that the school district's willing to reimburse. And then parents, in some cases, can opt to cover any additional fees. Let's say a school district says it's willing to cover up to $1,000. The parents may choose to pay privately out of pocket for the rest. Did you still have a question?
No, just a comment that the school district does have the option to say that our evaluation was good enough, and then there is the option to go to due process. And not that I would ever probably take that, but that is in the regulations.
Correct. Did everybody hear that, or do you want me to repeat it, Maria? She's not paying. Repeat it? Okay. So, say that again, John.
Okay.
The district has to agree or go to due process.
The school district may say say, we're okay with our evaluation, and we are going to not opt to pay for it at public expense, and the district and the families can decide to go to due process. Most of them won't do that, but that is in the regulations.
But that, to be clear, they have to agree or they have to take you to due process, right? So they can't just say no.
Yes.
That's illegal, and you can tell them that. They can say, if they say no, they have to file due process.
Okay, school districts can specify the providers, evaluators for an IEE that is false. They can give you a list of individuals, but a parent would have the right to go off of that list as long as they provide the credentials of the individual who will be doing the evaluation. Schools have to complete the full RTI process before evaluating a student that is false. But I do want to point this out, that a parent may request an evaluation and the school district has to do it, but because the student hasn't gone through the full RTI process, the school psychologist or the multidisciplinary team may make the eligibility determination that the student doesn't qualify, but they still have to conduct the evaluation. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. A student who has been diagnosed with dyslexia automatically qualifies for special ed services. That's false. You must have testing completed in order to obtain a 504 accommodation plan. That is false. You can have testing completed, but if you have sufficient documentation, and keep in mind, no decisions should ever be based on one single score or one single measure. You should always be looking for convergence of data. Dyslexia is very rare, that is false, and then dyslexia is not a disability under special education law. That's false, but I want to point out that there are according to IDEA, there are the 13 categories of special education, so the umbrella that dyslexia would fall under would be a specific learning disability. So how'd you do? Did anybody get all 12 correct?
Come on, I got Smarties in gift cards.
We've got gift cards.
All 12, anyone?
How about 11? Let's go with 11. Ooh. Okay, we have quite a few. Nicely done. And then we're going to draw for the raffle ticket because the other hat that I wear is as treasurer of the Reading League. So I want to make sure. Oh, and finally, if you could please, for Doreen, complete the yellow post-evaluation sheet. And we are going to draw for the raffle items right now, so get your raffle tickets ready.
School psychologist that has the fiber in there, that's not, I mean, C-top, there's all sorts of tests, it's a bunch of tests that would require, that you really look at. Yeah, so a lot of schools are using C-top, right? So it's not a specific test. Okay. It's a diagnosis based on the findings across a number of tests. Okay. Good question.
412.
Right. Okay.
444.
I'm gonna follow you around.
412 Northwest.
Don't follow me anymore.
Yeah.
In charge of the conference in the fall, October 27th. We are going to put the link to register for the conference live in the next few days. I want to emphasize there are only 300 spots for the conference, and that's going to be very important that if you are interested in attending this conference that you register soon. So again, the link for the conference should be going live. Mark Seidenberg is our keynote. It's going to be an amazing conference. So please stay tuned for information about that. Oh, any questions? Yeah, and Sheila and I are going to stick around, so if anybody has any more personal or individual questions, we will be available afterwards. And there is going to be a get-together at the retreat following this, where we're going to have wonderful discussions and learn lots more.
So those are the questions.
Oh, these are the questions. Anyway, handing me a piece of paper how to get to the retreat. When can you diagnose a learning disability? When can you diagnose? Okay. We have 3 questions. When can you diagnose a learning disability? Dyslexia, with a question mark, and how can people get trained on the assessment tools? So, dyslexia, I'm not sure if they wanted a definition.
So it's kindergarten for question 1 and 2. Can you get diagnosed that early? Yes.
You can get tested and evaluated, and you can be diagnosed with dyslexia as young as kindergarten and 1st grade, but it can, on wide range achievement tests, it is likely not going to show up. You are going to need to delve deeper, and just because a student might be identifying as having dyslexia does not automatically mean that they would qualify for special education services at that level. Yeah.
I just want to address this too because I have, I think, 3 kindergartners right now that I've been working with. So this is tricky because it's really hard to be able to make assessments around the kids' instruction, right? So remember all those parts of the law. Did they get the appropriate instruction? Yada, 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 right? So it's tough at this age, but it's not impossible, and there is no reason to wait, because what I love about this age is I can give them, and this is what I've done with these 3 kindergartners, I give them the reading assessment first, the 5 for assessment of reading, and I say, yeah, I think your child may be dyslexic. Lots of red flags, family history, low scores on, key things. We can finish the assessment and try to have your school agree to whether or not he's a child with a learning disability under special education law, right? Whether or not he's eligible. Or you can take the other half of the assessment fee you were going to pay me and do some good tutoring over the summer. And maybe we won't have to deal with that, okay? But can you recognize it and diagnose it as early as kindergarten? Absolutely. Will it necessarily qualify as a special education learning disability? Maybe not, but hey, isn't that the point? Isn't the point to figure out what the issues are and address them as early as possible? So often I hear from schools that they won't test a kid that young. It doesn't make sense to me. The point is to figure out what's going on and address it as soon as possible. So yes to learning disability, kindergarten, 1st grade, that would be really hard. 1st grade, absolutely. Kindergarten would be hard for learning disability, possible. Dyslexia, 100%. And how can people get trained? The test companies usually run webinars or seminars at NIAS and do that.
So for school psychologists, we can get professional development through the New York Association of School Psychologists. NIAS holds an annual conference, and many times new assessment measures bring in different people to present on the test measures and the changes, and they can get trained in those tests. For special educators, special education teachers who want to learn the test measures, they are also welcome to attend any of those sessions, but you could contact the publishing company of the test that you're interested in learning about, because many times they do workshops and they may bring in presenters to talk about a specific test measure, or there's assessment courses. I know the SU program does require their graduate special education students to take my psychoeducational assessment course, where I teach students who are training to be special education teachers how to administer, score, and interpret different achievement measures. Carlo?
So for the FAR has a training portal that if you order the test, there's a free webinar. It's like 3 hours long.
Wow.
Do everything.
That's great. I honestly wish every test would do that, because even tests that seem pretty straightforward, having worked in different places, I mean, I don't know if special education teachers or general education teachers, depending on who's administering achievement tests, if they've necessarily had assessment courses or training in different measures and know how to accurately administer and interpret and score the test. Oh, Maria.
Something we could do, like you could have a training or a publisher come in. I'm just putting that out there. We should think about that.
We could, that's something maybe we could talk about tomorrow night. We're at the retreat. A good segue. Okay, we are going to stick around because it's already almost 8:20, but we thank you so much for your attention and participation tonight. We will be here if you have specific questions, and we hope you all have a great night.